Welcome to another episode of Just One More Fix. This is James. With me in this episode is Carrie, Lacey, Lee, and Kurt.
Hey.
Hello.
Hi.
You can find us online at justonemorefix.com or on Twitter at JustOneMoreFix. If you like us, head over to iTunes or to Google Play and give us a rating and comment. In this episode, we're going to talk about what is the DnD Feel. And now, it's time to get our gaming fix. Welcome to Just One More Fix. Before we get into the main topic today, one quick announcement, I guess, is that Gen Con is right around the corner, as you guys should already know. So we're all super excited here for that because I think almost all of us from the podcast will be there. So we're planning to have some kind of a meetup. So if you're not following us on Twitter or on Facebook, that's where the announcements for that will come during Gen Con. And we'll also probably mention that in next week's episode when we get everything nailed down for sure. Also, we are going to do some sort of giveaway of some RPG supplies or books or something. We're still working that out as well. So look for that, the details on that as well. And that'll be for people that are at Gen Con. And we'll do that all at Gen Con, essentially. So right on.
And stuff.
Any other announcements? I don't think so. All right. So as you heard today, we're going to talk about what is the DnD Feel. We started a Fate game, a Fate Core. Well, that's not really Fate Core. It's more Fate Accelerated, but it's the Fate of Freeport. And Freeport is a fantasy city that has been through several different systems. I think it's in Savage Worlds, it's in Fate. But it uses, instead of approaches like you have in normal Fate Accelerated, it uses Strength, Dex, Con, Wisdom, Intelligence, Charisma. And when we got done playing, I noticed how much it really felt like a D&D game without ever actually playing D&D. So it made me wonder, what is it that everyone is chasing that is the D&D Feel?
Okay, so when I was sitting here thinking about it, I was thinking about magic, mood, adventure, and stats, because that's the thing. Those are the things that come to mind for me. That there's a heck of a lot of magic, that the mood is generally, I want to say upbeat, but it's definitely quite heroic and forward to tomorrow kind of thing. It's chock full of adventure for adventure's sake without a lot of like introspection or looking back. And it uses a stat-based system that's, you know, maybe a bit more crunchy at times, but it definitely, I don't know what it does actually, but it just always seems to have those stats.
Well, it's interesting because as we got to talking about this, me and Lacey were having a discussion about it. And it was interesting because there are several games that are pretty drastically different that really capture the feel. So obviously all the D&D games pretty much capture the D&D feel, except I think Fourth doesn't, but Fourth is a category onto itself. I think it's a good game in and of itself. It's just not in the flavor of Dungeons and Dragons in a classic sense.
I think everyone else and Wizards of the Coast agreed with you.
Right. Yeah. So I don't want to bag on it because in and of itself, I've seen a lot of people talk about how it's a good game. It just isn't in the D&D vein. So, but
I don't want to be like too stereotypical here, but I feel like you probably need Dungeons and Dragons.
Right.
What are you talking about? I mean, in those things, so it's monsters in exotic locations. It's basically what they're talking about.
Right. So it's not just mood and magic like you talked about. You have to have those high fantasy creatures too. That's a pretty big, big piece of it for me anyway.
I think it's that fantasy, that time period, that low technology area for me. Items and equipment.
But it is definitely high magic though. Like if you look at the Conan RPG, I've got a copy of that. It's the mood of it is completely different. The magic is completely different. Everything comes at a cost, and there's all this. Whereas in Dungeons and Dragons, magic's it's like popcorn, man. You need some more, just run down to the store.
But there are low magic campaigns and low magic settings that are a lot of fun for me, and still feel like D&D because you're fighting.
Yeah. And that has a very Dungeons and Dragons feel to it as well. So let me ask you. You mentioned some things, some specific pieces, and some of the two games that came to mind for me are one, Lamentations of the Flame Princess, which really hits on every cylinder about all the main things for Dungeons and Dragons that there are. You get to use all your polyhedrals. It's got class system. It's got saving throws. It's got your classic stats of Strength, Dex, Con, all that kind of stuff. But Fate of Freeport doesn't have hardly any of that stuff. There's no classes. It has the Strength, Dex, Con, and it doesn't have any hit points. It doesn't have classes at all, but it still felt like D&D when we ran it.
Because it's still an adventure. You're still out to find a goal.
That's what I mean. You've got that mood and you've got that magic. Now, the other stuff I would argue is definitely in there, but you've got those exotic locations, like Lacey said. You've got the creatures, the exotic creatures. But I think the thing that brings this to the table is the mood and the magic.
But 4th edition had all that stuff, and it didn't feel like D&D.
Okay, I'll be honest, I didn't play it enough, hardly like once, so I really can't talk about it. But it may also be just what you're bringing to the table.
Well, but like the way the game worked, like physically, the mechanics of it didn't have a D&D feel. A lot of stuff was on timers, essentially. So like once per encounter, you could use this thing. You know, it just did not have the classic D&D feel when you sat down to play it. And I can't exactly tell you what it is to put my finger on it, but I can tell you that it didn't feel like it didn't have the D&D feel.
Did you have enough arguments about alignment?
No, because I don't go down that rabbit hole.
It had the right setting. It was still the D&D setting. But it had all these extra rules and timers, which are reminiscent of a video game like RuneScape or
World of
Warcraft. So instead of having that organic tabletop feel where anything is possible, you got that video game feel. So it was the right setting and the right magic and the right monsters, but you weren't getting that anything is possible tabletop feel. You were getting that only the things that the game programmers have programmed in is possible feel.
AI wall.
That's what I think. That's what I took from it.
So that's what was interesting, because when we ran the Fate of Freeport game, when we got done, I was like, that really felt like a solid D&D game, but there is nothing at all reminiscent of D&D at a mechanical level, except for the names of the approaches.
So what about some of the other games that have lots of system and crunch built-in stats and that sort of low technology, like your Pathfinders or your Hackmaster?
Well,
what makes them different from D&D?
Pathfinder essentially is 3rd edition. It's very, very close, and I think it has captured the D&D feel. Would you guys agree?
I refer to that as version 3.75.
Yeah, that's what most people call it. So it very much captures that feel. And what was the other one you mentioned?
Hackmaster.
So,
I mean, it's even got the Hacklopedia of monsters, right?
Well, yeah. But most games have that GM guide, player guide, monster guide kind of thing going for them.
But Hackmaster it started off as a joke, right? It was in a comic strip, and then they came up with a system that I remember when we looked at it and we play tested it. It was purposefully designed to emulate 1st edition, right? I mean, that was the point.
Yeah, kind of the initial brewings or bubblings of the OSR movement, kind of, and it kind of developed into its own thing. And I don't know that it has the D&D feel, I would say. I'm not sure. We haven't played it a tremendous amount for me to really be able to say one way or the other. I think it could. I think it's definitely possible, because it's got the right kind of crunch and moving pieces that make it feel that way. But I wouldn't say 100% that I could, really put my finger on and say yes on that one.
Is everybody's D&D feel different, though? Because I have friends that played 4th edition and they loved it. It had the parts of D&D that they embraced in it.
Well, maybe it's because that's what you were first exposed to. And I'm not trying to say that 4th was a bad game, because I think it's the way it works, I think is very interesting, but I don't think it captures the feel of D&D.
Okay, no, I got to date myself in saying that the first time I played 1st edition was still the thing. And so I am forever locked into that high adventure, high magic, positive mood. Does that make sense? What is it? Murder hobos.
Well, yes, it's heroic and
I like how you equate that with a positive mood.
Oh, yeah.
Murder hobos, sunshines and rainbows.
Well, it's not introspective. It's not one of those deep brooding things where you have a humanity scale that goes down. The more goblins you kill, the more XP that you get. That's a positive thing.
Well, it's because there's an implied morality in it, and that it's okay to kill them because they are just evil.
Well, yeah, evil's okay to destroy.
And I think that's part of it too. Now, there's not necessarily an alignment in Fate of Freeport, but I think there's an implied morality to it, because you have these creatures that are very clearly, they're evil.
You're always the hero in the D&D game.
For the most part, yeah.
Even if you're the bad guy, you're still the hero.
Yeah, well, everyone's the hero of their own story. But I don't. It just made me wonder. I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer to it. I'm just curious what you guys thought, because I don't know if it's something that I did intentionally when we ran that Fate game, or if it's just something that happened by accident.
I think what Kurt just touched on is a big part of it that he actually didn't mention in his 4 things when you're talking about good versus evil. Because, for example, with World of Darkness, everything is on a grayscale.
Right.
D&D is very much black and white
Right.
when it comes to morality. I mean, just look at your paladins. I mean, you basically get bonuses against evil things.
Right.
It's actually a statistical
It's-
incentivization
well,
for
it's-
killing evil things.
I'd say that'd be under stats. I mean, it's your alignment is one of the stats that just doesn't have a number. It could because there's so few of them. I mean,
But it's actually
evil-
written into the character, like on the page.
You've ran Fate D&D before, though, because you ran Dragonlance as Fate, and it was a D&D game.
Did that feel like a D&D game to you?
Yes, with more of what I like out of D&D.
More
but
story aspect to
I
it. but-
I know people that get the D&D feel from Descent and Hero Quest.
Oh,
board games, and I don't at all.
Okay, I get the tactical aspect of it from that, but I don't get the role play aspect of it from there.
See, for me, I need the role play.
See,
I agree.
That's what's going to be interesting. I'm just about to start a 5e campaign, and I was never big on the crunch. I hated the fact that according to the rules, it would take you 35 minutes to conduct any kind of combat. I'm like, okay, no, because that's going to be boring. And so I would always just gloss over it and do something else. I'm convinced that it's the mood. It is what you bring to the table because it's a constructed reality, right? Everyone's sitting around the table. We construct it
but I
ourselves.
think that
and what
there's-
we agree upon as being the feel is what it is.
But there's a certain tactical element to D&D when you get out the miniatures and you have things plotted out. And I say, I get to move 30 feet, which is 5 feet per square. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is the size of my fireball. Like that's a very big piece of it to me as well.
And it is more than that too with the stats, because the other thing that nobody's mentioned yet is all the dice you get to roll with D&D,
polyhedrals.
and they're
Awesome.
different shapes, they're different sizes. And I mean, it's so impactful that to this day, when you find a place that's selling dice for role-playing games, you get a 20, a 12, an 8,
Right,
a
yeah,
10, a 6, and a 4. I mean, they still come packaged that way.
Oh yeah. Well, the other thing is when most people think of role playing games in general, if they're not familiar with the gaming world or industry or whatever, everything is just D&D. Is it Dungeons and Dragons? You know, I play RPGs. Oh, you mean Dungeons and Dragons? Well, no, it's something else, and then that's a giant rabbit hole to go down. But I think it's just this. I'm not sure how that was really going anywhere, but like it's sort of
It's iconic.
Yeah. So you guys mentioned Descent and those style of games, right? And Carrie, you said that you know a lot of people that get that D&D feel from Descent, and I very definitely do because it has that tactical aspect to it. Now, it isn't the complete D&D experience because there's no role playing with it, right? But what I will say is that game fills the void that I have for tactical combat that I lack when I play story games.
It's a quick fix.
It fills that spot that I like in the Dungeons and Dragons, methodology of things where its true roots come from in chainmail, in that it's a mini war game, and that's where
With the character.
yeah, and then you lose that character in Descent, and then I get that tactical combat fix there, and then I get my story fix with my the other role playing games.
See, now this is where I'm going to say everybody's D&D feel is going to be different, because I'm telling you what, been doing it since first edition, and we only ever roughly used the battle map. Like, yeah, it's about here and it's about there. I don't ever recall saying, "Oh, well, that's a line of sight issue, that kind of thing."
We didn't.
So
We didn't always get the battle map out though, but there was a lot of times where maybe we didn't have the battle map, but we would draw it out on a piece of paper and say, "This is where you're standing. He's around the corner. You can't see him." So there's still some tactical element to it.
well, yeah, but I mean, so when you were talking about a little bit ago, we're talking about the tactical element, which makes me think of the half-hour combats to let 3 arrows go. And to be perfectly honest, I find that dull. And so I tend to gloss over some of that stuff, abridge it, do whatever I need to do to pick up the pace. Because if I've got 5 or 6 people sitting around the table and it's taken a half hour to resolve this, and 3 people are on their phone and somebody else has gotten up to leave, to me, that's a failure.
But then aren't you selling short all the feats that fighters buy to be able to
That's a
do
loaded
things
question,
more?
because your implication in the question is yes, and I'm going to say no.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, because in the ability,
No,
the way the
because
game is set up.
If everyone at the table is having fun,
Oh, I
you're
agree.
doing it right.
I agree with that very much so. But what I'm saying though is everybody is sitting at the table and they're wanting marginally some kind of a different experience, right?
Yeah, which is
and
why
if you sit down to play a crunchy game, which 5th edition, 5th edition, 3rd edition, they're pretty crunchy.
well, they are what you want them to be, yes.
But
They're designed to be crunchy.
they're designed to
Yeah.
be. That's
You may
part-
not play them that way, but they
Right.
are designed.
It's
that
like
way.
Shakespeare. I do a lot of cutting. Okay,
But so
I like
the
to
thing
pick
is
up the
though
pace.
is when everybody sits down around the table, everybody wants something slightly different out of the game.
yeah.
And when I lay out my character and I build what I've got, and in a way, if you compare the abilities of a wizard to the abilities of a fighter, right? Just stick with me here for a minute, okay, for this analogy, right? So a wizard's spells or a cleric spells or a druid spells can be more narrative affecting, right? because that's what they, like depending on what the spell is, right? But that's what their abilities are. Now, when you take a fighter, their abilities and feats that they take and special abilities are mostly largely designed around combat, which is that tactical element. So aren't you selling one short?
Completely wrong. If you're doing all of your spells narratively and all of your combat not,
I'm not saying not all of it. I'm just saying there are components of it, right?
No, there are schools of magic and they have very set boundaries on what they do, what they don't do, area of effect, time of duration. And if you are putting your fighters in that very strict window of how far they can move, how much damage they can do, then you need to apply the exact same rule set to your wizards. You can't do one or the other.
You cannot cleave. You can't use cleave in the middle of an interaction, a verbal interaction with another NPC, but you could totally use Tasha's Hideous Laughter or minor one of the spells that creates illusory terrain. And that would have a more narrative effect than it would have a combat effect.
Yeah, and that or other skills that like clerics get, or like diplomacy or charm person. Those have a much more larger narrative effect that would apply in like what you're talking, and not at all in a tactical sense. Is like you're robbing the fighter from the tactical bonuses that he gets in combat.
Right, but the fighter has other abilities too that apply in a narrative way.
Name two.
Yeah.
There's like a list of 30 skills. Surely he has something that isn't used.
No, none of them are like diplomacy.
I think in 3.5 he gets Intimidate.
That might be it.
Okay, well, I played old school 3rd edition, so surely he has edition, that's use rope or something somewhere.
Okay, so I'm going to just lay down the whole, like when I first read Traveler, 1st edition, you leave in what you want to leave in for the people around your table, and you take out whatever you want to take out. If the D&D police are not coming for you, and hold on a second, if the D&D police are not coming for you, and if it works for you and the people around the table, I don't care what they've designed. That feel is constructed by the people around the table, and that's where it comes from. That's the reason why you can have fate, which is the least crunchy thing that I can imagine. It's like the donut of gaming systems. I mean, it's great, but it's definitely soft.
To be fair, the Fate of Freeport system is incredibly crunchy for a Fate game.
For Fate, yeah.
There's a list of 6 skills. I mean, there's like it's.
Well, no, but it's got
giving you a number. Yeah.
It has equipment bonuses for both weapons and armor. It has spells that work in a very mechanical way. It is, as far as Fate goes, there's a lot more moving parts to it than a regular Fate game.
Okay.
But
for me, I was kind of in the same school of thought as Kurt was as a player. Like, I didn't want to do the combat. I checked out as soon as it started. It didn't matter to me. I tolerated it because other people in the room wanted it. But then I played Exalted, and I know that has nothing to do with D&D, but in it you describe what you do when you attack someone. You describe what you do when you interact with someone, and it gets cool. And so I started running combats where you still rolled those dice and you still did it, but you told me what you did.
Right.
And then I told you exactly what that monster did. I added blood, I added guts, I added humor. I made the combat a story so that I could tolerate it because it needed to be there. And me not liking it wasn't going to make it be any better.
Right.
So I had to change it to be a story, but you still get those dice and those rules and your great cleave and your 5-foot step if you want it. But, but I didn't like make someone that didn't know those rules or want to add that crunch not have the ability to do those things. If they told me they did something cool, I would give them a bonus. So yeah, you might not know that you get a +2 and you have higher ground. I know that, and you just described you jumping up on that bed to slash someone's head off, so here, add 2 to your roll.
Well, now I will say the way they've handled it in 5th edition is probably the best way to do it. So if you have something that gives you an advantage, or like higher ground or whatever, you just get advantage and you roll 2 dice, 2 d20s, and take the better of them. And likewise, with disadvantage, you roll 2 and take the lower of them. And that's the perfect solution to all the moving parts that existed in 3 and 3.5 and in Pathfinder. But one of the things I think that is part of I think it became more part of D&D in 3rd edition than in 2nd edition, because in 3rd edition, there was a lot of system mastery to it. You know, whether I took the right feats to get the right spells and, maximize spell or cleave, great cleave, spring attack, all this kind of stuff. And you were rewarded in a way for system mastery, for understanding how pieces fit together and how they work together, right?
Rules layering.
No, but that's not... I think that's using them efficiently.
Rules lawyering is arguing all the time over the rules.
Yeah. And being obstructive about it. But like, I feel...
don't think lawyers can be obstructive. It's against the rules.
No, they can do it until the judge says no more.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
There you go. But I think that, at least
order.
in sense of 3rd edition and beyond, it definitely became part of it, because in 2nd edition, there weren't as many moving pieces, right? It was pretty clean.
And if you go back even further to those real skinny hardback 1st edition books, like, are you going to use from Dungeoneer's Survival Guide? There were proficiencies and all that stuff. And there was all this stuff from Manual to Planes, and you could take it or leave it. And so I don't know about other old guys, but early on we took a very modular approach. Listen, if you don't want to do this, we just threw the whole freaking thing out. And then we said, this is what we're doing instead.
Well, and Dungeons and Dragons has always given you the license to do that. Like in the GM chapter, it says, well, ultimately, you're the boss.
But I think it comes back to the whole piece with 4th edition, is that if you cut so many pieces of it out, when does it stop being D&D?
When everyone around the table says that it no longer is, because it's a constructive narrative.
But
Your
almost
version-
everybody that played D&D agrees that 4th edition isn't a
Yeah,
D&D
but you
feel.
say that, but it was for some people. I'll bet you the 15 and 16-year-olds that I sent those books home with, when 5th came out, they're all like, if they looked at them, they're like, well, this isn't what I remember. If 4th was just a very short window. You know what I mean?
They said that 4th sold the most books out of any edition up to that point, but that's because so many people loved 2nd and 3rd edition that they went on a limb and bought 4th edition, and then Pathfinder came out because 4th was so bad.
I don't think that's true necessarily either, because people were brought in from like online gaming communities.
That was how they sold it, but I'm not convinced that any of those people were not in the realm beforehand.
The best critique of 3rd versus 4th I ever saw was they said that 3rd was a game designed for people that understood gaming, that came from 2nd edition to go into 3rd edition, that was something much more complicated, but understood how D&D worked, where 4th edition was an entry-level game where you could start off with this game and not have so many moving pieces and understand it easily.
I mean, I'll be honest. I was turned off by a lot of pieces of 3 just because there were so many moving parts. I'm like, I'm here to play a game. Like, sometimes you want to play Arkham Horror, but sometimes you want Candyland or something a little bit stripped more down. And, when there's, so you got this and that, and okay, I'm going to synergize my Greater Cleave with my Attack of Opportunity. And finally, at some point, I just go, all right, Goblin's dead. Let's move swiftly on here and go to do something else. I mean, it's good, but again, it depends on who you've got sitting around the table.
I think there's another aspect, speaking of that vein, that we haven't really hit on with the D&D feel, and it has something very much to do with character advancement and all of those shiny, cool abilities that you can get.
Levels and XP.
And they just seem to matter so much more in D&D than in any other game that I seem to play. And all of those cool little, I really want Great Cleave, but before I can get that, I have to buy Cleave. And before I can get that, I have to buy whatever the other thing is you have to buy before you can get Cleave.
In games like World of Darkness or in Burning Wheel or a lot of other games, your advancement is incremental. Whereas in D&D, it's in these large chunks of, I just went up a level, I went up a level, I went up a level.
Well, and especially early on, those come pretty quick. Like, you're going to start first level. By the end of that first adventure, you better have made it to 2nd or your character is dead.
Along with that level and that character creation and those goals that come with it, there's also the stuff and stuff goals. Everybody wants more stuff. I need my sword. I need my armor. And you said Freeport has those armor bonuses.
That's true. Yeah, it does.
You get
the new Dungeon Master's Guide is got like an entire chapter on cool and shiny things. It's awesome. I'm looking through it. I'm like, where was this when I was young? And just thumbing
in the Arms and Equipment Guide.
Arms and Equipment Manual, the Magic Item Compendium, all those books that I want because they have more stuff to throw in the game.
It's actually very reminiscent of selling D&D books, in fact. I just need that 2nd or 3rd or 4th monster manual.
Wait a second.
I can have all the birds.
Works. Give me more. Shut up. Take my money.
DM level 4 accomplished. I have a non-core book.
All right, right on. So I don't know that there was I'm not sure really what the point of this was. It was just something interesting that, it was just something interesting that occurred to me.
Can we give like a consensus though before we wrap up? So like each person can say like the one thing that is D&D feel for them, but in order to make it so that we don't all say the exact same thing, we'll go, you can't say the same thing somebody else already said.
Who goes first?
Oh, that is the important question, isn't it?
Carrie goes first.
Okay, Carrie can go first.
All right. Fantasy.
I don't think that's enough.
It's enough for me.
Has to be high fantasy.
Not enough for you?
Sure has to be high fantasy. Fantasy is very broad.
It's got to be high fantasy. Come on.
Fantasy. There's just a monster.
High fantasy implies dragons. Fantasy does not.
Dragons, yeah. I think Lacey might be right on this one.
No, because Game of Thrones is not high fantasy. It's normal fantasy and has dragons.
There's magic and zombies and dragons.
There's barely magic. It's just normal fantasy.
Barely, and yet still
No,
there.
it's coming. It's growing as the books progress.
The
but,
minute the red
yeah.
priestess shows up,
They
it
resurrected
becomes
somebody.
High fantasy.
Somebody cast Resurrect Noble.
Yeah. So I mean, it counts for something.
I don't know
guess.
that this is the nerdiest
All right, so-
argument I've ever had, but it's probably
Most people that watch it won't admit that it's high fantasy because they didn't start watching it for that. They just got sucked in.
I think that maybe high fantasy it has something to do with the length of a character's lifespan. So I think from that perspective, Game of Thrones might be low fantasy.
that is an interesting counterpoint, sir.
Yeah, right. Huh? All right, so Carrie's high fantasy. What about you, Lacey?
Oh, do I have to go next?
Yeah.
Oh, damn.
Round table.
It's square. It's
Shape.
counterclockwise. This is Australia.
What?
Shape?
Huh?
Shape.
Go ahead.
I don't know yet. Come back to me.
All right, so Lee,
Magic.
you've got to give me more than one word.
Lots and lots of magic. Shiny items, they're shiny because they're magic. Spells, they're awesome because they're magic. Yeah.
So just lots of magic, essentially, is what you're saying.
Yes, lots of magic.
Right on, Kurt.
I would say epic adventure and
One thing.
You can elaborate on it. Sure, if you want.
okay. Just epic adventure. That the scope of the adventure
Larger than
is
life.
going to be larger than life, swinging from the chandeliers. Eventually, we're going after dragons. That's just how it's going to be. Yeah, magic swords and all that stuff with it play into the high adventure. Just big characters with high adventure with a complete lack of introspection.
I'm going to say for me, it's the black and white morality. Like the complete good versus evil. If that wasn't there, I don't think I would be playing a D&D game.
I kind of think that is very close to where I was going to go because you think of the source, a lot of it like Tolkien, it's very clearly good versus evil.
Wait, hold on a second. Didn't you just make a character that was chaotic neutral?
I did, but at some point I will still end up being either good.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to clarify that as a point.
That's why you pick neutral, so that you can be good and
You can
evil.
go or either way, right? Right on. Yeah, but I think it's
You may
close.
say that, but there's still going to be goblins who are definitely evil.
Oh, yeah,
And there's going to be elves who are good, you know?
I'm just thinking back to that Fate of Freeport game because that's what kind of brought all this thought on in my mind. And I don't really know if I can really put my finger on something. That's why I started this whole thing is I don't even know what it was. But when I got done, I thought, well, maybe it's the stats because when we roll strength, dex, con, like that puts me in the D&D mind. I'm like, roll your strength, roll a strength check, roll a dex check, right? But then when you mentioned in the other one, I ran just a regular Fate core game that was a Dragonlance game. And if you say it felt like a D&D game, well, that was none of that there. But it didn't feel like quite the same in that game as it did in the Fate Freeport
So you
game.
didn't get the D&D feel from the
I
Dragonlance
did, but
game?
not as much.
See, I think for you, the tactical combat aspect, that's the strongest argument that you've made that you've come back to it.
Well,
And
yeah. Well, okay.
I have trouble, refuting it. I try, but it's definitely part of it.
That's on the player side of it. And this is, I guess the question came from me when I was running it, right? And I don't know, because when we got done, because there was some tactical combat that happened in that Fate of Freeport game in the way that combat is tactical in Fate. You have zones and you move from zone to zone, but it's not like 5-foot steps.
But in Fate of Freeport, we still busted out the miniatures.
We did. And maybe that was it too.
Ooh.
I didn't even think about that. Maybe it was having minis on the table and rolling dice and seeing the visualization of it all. And granted, it still worked as zones. We didn't count 5-foot steps, but it was very tactile and visceral that, it channeled that.
Wait a minute, but were the miniatures made out of lead? Because the best miniatures we all know are made out of lead.
No,
What?
because I want to drop them and step on them and not have to worry about them. You're going to say something, Gary?
You were playing with dice, and everybody was building their own dice pool. Maybe that's it.
Dice pool. No, it's still Fate dice, only 4 dice. So I don't know. That's why I guess I asked this question is because I was trying to figure out the answer and I heard lots of them, but I don't even know what mine is. So I don't think that there is a right answer. Do you know what I'm saying? I think
way
it's
to play Switzerland. Just be non-committal on us.
okay.
Sorry if you're in
okay. So
Switzerland.
if I'll take a stand and I'll say
Brings it up and he won't even answer the
no.
question.
Well,
we demand you commit.
And you can't repeat an answer.
so
Please go right ahead.
I think the piece for me as a player is the tactical fiddly bits of it. Do you know what I'm saying? Like that part of it is. But when it comes to running it, I think it's more than that. I think it's the construction of the story and the mood and the it doesn't necessarily have to be high fantasy, but it has to be larger than life. Because Dragonlance, while it's high fantasy, it's low power. But that is still very D&D to me.
It's epic.
Yeah. Even though you're not crazy powerful, it's still epic for you. You know what I mean? Everything that you're affecting.
Somebody in that story is definitely crazy powerful and end of the world kind of.
Yeah.
So some of it for you then is scope. So you can't just play a D&D game at the inn. You have to leave the inn.
I don't think if you don't leave the inn, you're not even playing a game.
No, that's not true at all. You can be totally locked in a mansion and play a D&D game. And an inn can be like a mansion.
I think it's
if
called
got a
Ravenloft,
basement.
isn't it?
No, it's called Chateau Curse Chateau. Yeah.
What?
So it's a Lamentations game. So
Which was D&D.
yeah.
That's not fair. You got to be in the yard too.
So and a hedge maze and Curse Chateau is pretty awesome. Check it
You
out.
marked what room you were in.
All right, right on. So, like I said, there's a lot of different. I'm not sure there's a wrong answer to this one, but there are many right answers. But it was just something I thought was an interesting thing to think about to see what you guys all thought. Because like I said, Fate is very definitely not a D&D game. But when I got done with those games, I felt like we sat down and had a good old fashioned dungeon crawl essentially, and was like, wow, that was kind of odd. Because I've had that feeling with Lamentations, but Lamentations is very definitely using the polyhedrals. It has all the pieces that would be in a D&D game, and Fate of Freeport, well, has none of that. So, I was just curious.
Rules.
Well, it did have rules, and there was a dungeon.
I don't think you're playing a game if you don't have rules.
So, all right, right
More
on.
rules.
Well, as always, thank you guys for listening, and you can follow us support us. You can support us by following us on Twitter or giving us a rating and a comment on Google Play, Stitcher, iTunes, or wherever it is that you find our podcast. You can follow us on Facebook as well. All those things are linked from from the Just One More Fix website at justonemorefix.com. And the best way to help us out is to spread the word through people that you know that don't listen to us and our awesome advice and these rambling stories that we have that go on forever. So without any further ado, I guess we will see you guys next week. Thanks for listening. This has been another episode of Just One More Fix. Music has been provided by Kevin MacLeod. You can find him at incompetech.com. You can find us at justonemorefix.com and follow us on Twitter at justonemorefix.